Effective today, Sunday, the 21st of September 2025, the Commonwealth of Australia recognises the State of Palestine.
Standing outside the United Nations headquarters in New York, Prime Minister Anthony Albanese declared a landmark foreign policy shift, decades in the making, taking the step in tandem with the United Kingdom and Canada. Israel and Republicans have threatened retaliation, while human rights experts have warned that Western nations must do more to stop an unfolding genocide. So why has Australia chosen this moment? And what else needs to happen? Good to have you back on Full Story, Tom.
Hi, Nour. Good to be with you.
You are in New York following the Prime Minister's visit to the UN General Assembly. What has the last 24 hours been like?
It's been a pretty hectic 24 hours. We left Canberra on Saturday morning Australian time, flying with Anthony Albanese to New York via Honolulu. There's about 20 journos travelling with the Prime Minister, and we arrived in New York ahead of a pretty busy schedule. We're staying close to the United Nations and travelling back and forth from the UNHQ. New York's really busy at this time of year. This part of town is overrun by diplomats and journalists and government officials. Motorcades at 10 paces around here at the moment. Anthony Albanese and Penny Wong were at the UNHQ this morning and again this evening for events. They have formally announced Australia's recognition of Palestine and Palestinian statehood. That is a decision that is effective as of Sunday, Australia working in concert with Canada and the UK on the timing. It's quite extraordinary. It's the first time Anthony Albanese is going to address the UN as Prime Minister, which is a significant event for him in his tenure as PM. Penny Wong is obviously well known to people here and spends quite a lot of time in the presence of foreign ministers and other diplomats who work from this place. So it's a high stakes week.
Tom, let's talk a little bit more about Palestinian recognition. Australia, Canada, the UK, they now join the majority of UN member states in recognising a Palestinian state. This was something that Anthony Albanese flagged several weeks ago. Talk to me about how it took formal effect on Sunday.
It's quite interesting. It turns out the way that countries recognise different states is simply by issuing a statement with a date when it becomes effective, and that's what's happened. The Prime Minister and the Foreign Minister put out a statement. As I say, it was issued on Sunday, and they've spoken to it here today. There's no vote, there's no other formal mechanism. It's simply a statement that says Australia recognises Palestine as a country. And they also specified that diplomatic decisions, including opening of an embassy and diplomatic relations, will come in different ways over time that hasn't been specified. So really this is a first step in a long process. Obviously, the state of Palestine is going to be a long-term adjustment for Australia, a shift in our foreign policy, and things like opening of an embassy, working with a government in the future are a long way down the road.
Perhaps unsurprisingly, Tom, the Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, who is wanted by the ICC for war crimes, has lashed out, insisting that he will never allow a Palestinian state, also admitting that he has stood in the way of that for years. How has Anthony Albanese responded to those statements?
Yeah, the Prime Minister has said that Australia is acting in its own national interest and making decisions that reflect Australian values and Australia's agenda on the international scene. He sought to brush aside those quite inflammatory comments from Benjamin Netanyahu. I think he was trying to avoid getting into a slanging match with the Israeli Prime Minister. The Foreign Minister has been a bit more pointed previously. She's made the case that Benjamin Netanyahu is increasingly isolated in the international community. So today they were mostly focused on the recognition aspect and putting aside the politics and the quite pointed statement from Benjamin Netanyahu. He said that Israel will formally respond to this recognition push once he returns to Israel from the United States this week. there was a very ominous tone to that statement. He told world leaders to stand by for the nature of that response.
With regards to the United States, while Anthony Albanese was on his way to New York, 25 Republicans wrote a letter to Australia and other nations warning that they could face punitive measures if they push ahead with recognition. Is it clear to you what kind of retribution they could be referring to and whether that's of concern to the Australian government?
Look, I'm sure it is of concern. The United States is Australia's closest security and defence partner, and these are close allies of the US President Donald Trump. People like Ted Cruz of Texas signed on to this statement. It was sent to the President and to the Secretary of State Marco Rubio, as well as to the leaders of Britain and Canada. We don't know much about what they mean when they say punitive measures. Equally, it's not the Trump administration making this statement, it is congressional representatives. But we do know that Donald Trump is opposed to Palestinian recognition. He's previously hinted at possible retaliation, particularly to Canada, over this. And it comes in a fascinating moment in the Australia-US alliance. Our listeners will know well that Donald Trump is yet to meet with Anthony Albanese. There is the AUKUS nuclear submarine pact, trade issues, and pressure on Canberra to spend more on defence. The issue of Palestinian recognition fits into that kind of complex picture, a bit more complex than we're used to in the Australia-US relationship.
And I do want to talk about that potential meeting with Trump a little later. But just last week, a UN independent International Commission of Inquiry concluded that Israel is committing genocide in Gaza. Beyond this step, which many regard as symbolic, will Australia take any other measures in response to those findings? We've heard from the UN Special Rapporteur Francesca Albanese, who says that Australia should be using its leverage against Israel.
Yeah, I think in a diplomatic sense, there is pressure on Israel from Australia. That's been the case for a while now. Anthony Albanese and Penny Wong both restated today that there is a need for a ceasefire and a need for urgent humanitarian assistance for the people of Gaza. I don't think at the moment we will see other measures against the Israeli government like sanctions. Obviously, a couple of ministers in the Netanyahu cabinet have sanctions from Australia, but there doesn't seem to be a move at this time for more sanctions to be imposed. So I think in the country-to-country sense, the status quo will remain. But we will see in the next couple of days here in New York, Australia moving with partners like France. The PM's due to meet the French President Emmanuel Macron in New York, and he'll hold talks in the next week or so with Keir Starmer of Britain and Mark Carney of Canada. These are the leaders that Anthony Albanese is aligning with. And I imagine they will be talking about future steps, how recognition is going to play into the ongoing conflict, and the push for peace and for a ceasefire, for people to get help with food and medical supplies badly overdue in Gaza. It will be fascinating to see if this group of world leaders continues to work together in that regard.
Can you talk to me about this conference that is being led by France and Saudi Arabia around a two-state solution?
Yeah, that's the next set piece on the agenda here in New York. Anthony Albanese's position is that recognition of a Palestinian state is living up to the long-held policy Australia has for a two-state solution. He makes the quite obvious statement that if there's going to be two states, one will be Israel and the other will be Palestine. He's going to make a speech at that conference hosted by the French and the Saudi governments. And I think we will see that as more international pressure on Israel, a growing sense that this is an overdue step for Palestine to be considered a state. As you said earlier, Nour, a majority of UN countries already recognise Palestine. What it means for Australian foreign policy going forward is going to be fascinating. I think the recognition is partly symbolic at this point because the commitments that the Palestinian Authority has made in exchange for recognition really require the war to be subject to a ceasefire, for the fighting to end, and for a post-conflict reality to start coming into force. The Foreign Minister, Penny Wong, has talked about school curriculum and governance from the Palestinian Authority. These kinds of things will be very important, but at least in the immediate moment while the fighting is going on, indeed while Israel is ramping up its fighting in Gaza, it will be difficult for those commitments to be delivered.
Tom, a lot of the commentary around Anthony Albanese's visit to the UN in New York has been around whether he will secure a meeting with the US President Donald Trump. When he touched down at JFK Airport, there was still no confirmation of that. Have you heard anything? Has a meeting been secured?
At the time of recording, there doesn't seem to be an announcement on a meeting. I think the push for Australia is really on. They're keen to get Anthony Albanese in a room with Donald Trump as soon as possible. You know, we're 8 or so months into his term as president, and it's becoming a irritant for the government that he hasn't been able to get in the room with Donald Trump. Obviously, they were due to meet in Canada in June on the sidelines of the G7 summit, but Trump left early to deal with matters in the Middle East, and that meeting was cancelled. There's a couple of days where both Donald Trump and Anthony Albanese will be in the same place, and we expect them to shake hands and say hello at a cocktail reception that the United States will host for world leaders participating at the General Assembly. That probably wouldn't constitute a meeting in a formal foreign policy sense. That'll be an opportunity for them to say a quick hello to each other. What we might expect, if the schedules align and if the United States president is amenable, is a pull aside, to use the term that is often used in these settings, where the two leaders on the sidelines of another meeting have a short conversation, or a formal bilateral meeting where they sit in a room where they have a substantive chat, and potentially where journalists observe the start of the meeting and potentially the leaders could take questions. But look, that's all very much hypothetical at this point. And the clock's really ticking. You know, Donald Trump will have a big schedule here in New York. Anthony Albanese's got a lot on his plate as well. It remains to be seen whether it's going to happen here in New York, their first meeting.
When the PM's been asked about a meeting with Donald Trump, he's shrugged off questions, saying that nobody in the real world cares. But some Guardian reporting over the weekend shows just how much effort has gone into trying to secure a meeting. I was wondering if you could talk to me about what's been going on behind the scenes.
Oh, look, there's no doubt that the Department of Foreign Affairs, Anthony Albanese's office, Kevin Rudd, the Australian ambassador in Washington, are really making a full court press to try and get the Prime Minister in a room with the President. As I say, it's a historic alliance. It's Australia's closest security and defence alliance. There's trade issues, all kinds of things on the agenda. And it is a status moment for the Australian Prime Minister as well. Traditionally, visiting the White House, sitting in the Oval Office with the Prime Minister has been a kind of touchstone point of their foreign policy performance as Prime Minister. So while Anthony Albanese is publicly downplaying this delay, I'm sure it's frustrating for him and for the federal government that that meeting hasn't happened yet. And it's appropriate that public servants and diplomats behind the scenes would be, being in touch with their counterparts in the White House, with the National Security Council, and trying to engineer this meeting. We have seen the Defence Minister Richard Marles and other members of the government meet with their counterparts in the administration. Pete Hegseth, the Defence Secretary, has met with Richard Marles, as has the Vice President and some senior advisors to Donald Trump. Those meetings in the past few weeks were seen as possible precursors to the leaders getting together. But Donald Trump's due back in Washington in a couple of days, so the window is pretty tight here in New York.
Many have expressed concern about Trump's increasingly authoritarian leadership. If Anthony Albanese does secure a meeting with the US president, what will he be trying to convey? What are Australia's priorities or objectives in a meeting?
I think he'll be trying to get a sense from the US president about his views of the AUKUS agreement. The Pentagon review is a couple of months away from being completed, and there's concern in the Australian defence establishment about question marks over AUKUS proceeding. the government says publicly that they think it's appropriate that that review take place, and they believe that the United States will stick with the deal. Equally, they want to talk about trade tariffs. Australia's on the baseline tariff rate in Trump's tariff regime, but the PM will probably want to talk about some exemptions on steel and aluminium and other possible areas like pharmaceuticals, that kind of thing. And look, from the United States side, I think Donald Trump will want to talk about defence spending. Australia is well below the rate that he believes countries should be spending, this notional level of 3.5% of GDP. Australia is well below that. So there's things on both sides that the leaders will want to talk about. The other important thing here, I think, to say is that these two leaders are going to have to work together for the next few years, and it's important that they have a chance to build some rapport, to get a sense of each other, to understand how each other thinks and how decisions are made in the two governments. And traditionally, that has really been beneficial, them sitting down together, be it at the White House or somewhere else, to have that opportunity to get to know each other. I think the first meeting, whatever form it takes, will be important in that sense. The cooperation from these two men will have to start at that point once they get to know each other a little bit.
In a clip that circulated online last week, Trump berated ABC journalist John Lyons, and he told him that you are hurting Australia very much when he asked questions about the president's business interests. Is it clear what Trump meant by that, and do you think it makes Anthony Albanese nervous going into a meeting with the president?
Oh, look, I think it probably doesn't help. Obviously, Donald Trump mentioned that Anthony Albanese was coming to the United States in the context of that question and answer on the White House lawn with John Lyons. My sense is that Trump views any critical questioning of his performance, in Lyons' case, asking about business deals that the president's family business is doing while he's in the Oval Office. He interprets that as an attack and as criticism of him. They were straightforward questions. They were completely appropriate in my view. But the president is very tetchy about what he perceives as negative coverage from the media. So look, I think probably that's not a huge element of what's going on between the two leaders. But if the president was already frustrated with Australia in other ways, I guess it doesn't help that he viewed the Australian media as attacking him by asking questions about his family business.
All right, Tom, the Prime Minister has a jam-packed schedule over the coming days. What will they look like? What else is on the agenda?
Yeah, he's going to hold talks about the government's social media ban for children under 16 years of age. He thinks that the international community is interested in Australia's policy moves, and countries like Greece and the European Union are interested in following what Australia is doing. The Communications Minister, Annika Wells, will be here for an event about the social media ban. Equally, he's seeking a meeting with the Turkish president to discuss Australia's bid to host the COP31 climate talks in Adelaide next year. Turkey remains in the race for that event, and under the rules, one country or other has to drop out, or neither will get the right to host. The Climate Change and Energy Minister Chris Bowen has come to New York to meet with his counterpart from Turkey. And if it rises to a meeting between President Erdogan and Prime Minister Albanese, that will be significant. After New York, he's headed to London. He'll meet the UK Prime Minister Keir Starmer, and he's got a few days in London before heading to the Middle East and then back to Australia. It's quite a long prime ministerial trip, 11 days in total. It's a long time for Anthony Albanese to be out of the country, but his view is that the agenda is important and that the countries that he's visiting are important to Australia. So it'll be interesting to see how those other engagements go further down the agenda of the trip.
Well, it'll also be a big fortnight for you, Tom, so we'll let you get some rest. Thanks so much for your time.
Nour, it's great to be with you. Thanks a lot.